I never thought I'd find myself standing in front of this opulent skyscraper. The entrance was decorated with tall floral arrangements and glass windows that shone in the golden city lights. Visitors exiting luxury cars were decked out in their finest attire. Women wore glistening gowns, and men, in a world of status and power, laughed and mingled in tailored tuxedos. Then, I was asked to attend Claudia's wedding, my ex-wife of years, even though I had no business going. I forced her. From my thoughts, allowing time and space to wash away the sour conclusion we had shared. I had moved on, or at least I had persuaded myself of that. But then the handwritten invitation showed up. When I saw the familiar curve of her script, I felt a sense of elegance and deliberateness. I hope you'll go. That was all she wrote. No explanation, nothing more. I should have disregarded it, but those 4 words lingered with meaning. A man's curiosity can lead him to places he knows he shouldn't go. Entering the grand ballroom felt like stepping into another era. Chandeliers hung like cascading stars, their tumbling crystals illuminating the marble floors beneath my feet. Waiters glided across the room, carrying champagne glasses, while a live orchestra played a soft tune that seemed to vanish into thin air. Claudia had always envisioned this world, a world far removed from the one we once shared. I kept to the shadows, unnoticed, at least until I saw him, Richard, the man who had usurped my place. I knew who he was. How could I not? A finance mogul, a member of the elite, his face often appeared in business publications, right next to my ex-wife. He stood in the middle of a well-dressed group, his presence commanding attention. His arm was wrapped possessively around Claudia's waist, and then his gaze landed on me. I expected him to ignore me, to act as though I were a ghost from Claudia's past, as though I didn't exist. But instead, he grinned. A patronizing grin, one that men like him always wore when looking down at those they deemed beneath them. He stepped forward. His voice was a low sneer. "You're a middle-class nobody, a school dropout. Why don't you cut your losses and walk away?" I met his gaze, studying the conceit in his face, the way his lips curled in smug satisfaction. He expected me to tremble under his words. I could have reacted, could have let my pride push me into a confrontation. But I didn't. I just smiled. Because if Richard truly believed I was just a forgotten footnote in Claudia's story, then he was in for a surprise. Claudia and I weren't always like this. There was a time when we were inseparable. Me, the man she had loved for years, and her, the untouchable CEO of a major bank. Back then, she looked at me with admiration, the way someone looks at their entire world. She believed that 2 people from vastly different backgrounds could conquer anything together. But Claudia had ambition. She had always been methodical, her every move calculated to reach her destination. I, on the other hand, never cared for institutions, rules, or pre-approved paths. My heart belonged to music, the piano, the melodies. She used to love that about me. She would sit beside me on the piano bench, her head resting on my shoulder as my fingers danced across the keys. I wrote songs just for her, and she once told me that it made her feel alive. "You don't have to follow their rules," I had told her. "You only live once." And she had smiled, a soft, secret smile, meant only for me. But as time passed, her admiration turned into resentment. "You can't just live on music alone," she had said one evening, irritation creeping into her voice. Claudia needed stability. She never missed an opportunity. And she saw my refusal to play by the rules as a sign that I had no future at all. At first, the changes were subtle, gentle nudges for me to think about my future, to find something stable. Then, the gap between us became impossible to ignore. One night, In our small apartment, the one we had moved into after college, Claudia came home late. She stood by the door, posture stiff. "We need to talk," she murmured. I already knew what was coming. "This isn't working. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just nodded." She had already made up her mind. And so, I let her go. Claudia climbed the corporate ladder. I disappeared into my music, traveling from city to city. She built her grand halls. I played in jazz bars and on street corners. She became a powerful, respected name, and I became something she never expected. Now, standing in the heart of her world, I took in the ballroom, the chandeliers, the expensive suits, the careful conversations about mergers and power. This was her universe. So, why did she invite me? Why are you even here? The voice belonged to Marcus, Claudia's younger brother. Unlike his sister, Marcus had never judged me. He had always appreciated my music, even snuck into my performances just to listen. I smirked. Marcus shook his head. "Richard is a fool. He doesn't know who he's dealing with." I chuckled, shaking my head. That's when Richard spoke again, louder this time, his voice cutting through the room. "This is an event for people of status," he scoffed. He was enjoying his little power trip, and I could have humbled him with a few well-placed words. But instead, I just laughed, because this man, this so-called mogul, had no idea who he was insulting. Not yet. Marcus smirked. "You really don't know who he is, do you?" he murmured. For the first time, Richard faltered. "What the hell are you talking about?" I could have told him the truth right then and there. But where was the fun in that? Instead, I simply took another sip of my drink. Richard would find out soon enough. And when he did, his entire world would crumble. Because I wasn't just some dropout. I wasn't just Claudia's past. I was something far, far greater. And Richard? He was in for the shock of his life. Voice low-pitched. "Let's just raise a brow rash instead of being rash." I swallowed. "I'm merely suggesting that we speak. You don't need to delete your account. Let's just be reasonable here." I observed him for a long minute. A part of me pondered, dragging this out. I continued to watch him wriggle for a short while, but soon I realized I was bored and returned my focus to Claudia. She didn't respond, which was hilarious because I wondered how things would work out. But she couldn't. She was aware that no matter how much prestige or power she had amassed, no matter how far she believed she had come, she lost. Not because I sought retribution, not because I had devised a complex plan to degrade her, but because life has a way of working things out. Tonight was fate. I turned away from them and started to leave. But just as I decided to settle the score, Richard shouted after me one final time. "Wait a minute, you're not really deleting your account, are you?" I grinned and didn't bother to check. After giving it some thought, I left the ballroom, leaving behind a wedding that would be remembered. But for all the wrong reasons. The night air felt cool against my skin as I made my way to the grand staircase. I took cautious, measured steps all the way down to the courtyard. This wasn't how I had anticipated the evening to go. When I originally opened Claudia's invitation, I didn't have high expectations. I assumed she sent it out of duty or perhaps to prove to herself that she had moved on. Had she won? I wasn't sure anymore. Not after the way she glanced at me back then. That wasn't the expression of a triumphant woman. It was the look of someone who had realized, too late, that everything she had estimated was incorrect. The wind carried the muted buzz of voices from inside. Despite the tension that had cracked the flawless illusion, the celebration continued. I could only imagine the whispers spreading now, the hushed conversations dissecting the moment they had all personally witnessed. Even though I had been living outside of their world for years, I had somehow still managed to reframe my existence within it. I was about to call for a car when I heard hasty footsteps at the bottom of the steps. I sighed as I waited. Before I even turned around, I recognized the person. Claudia. Her silhouette was framed by the golden lights of the ballroom entrance. She still held herself with that same graceful, poised control, even as everything around her seemed to crumble. But now, for the first time since she arrived, she wasn't the unwavering CEO. She wasn't performing for an audience. At this moment, she was simply Claudia, the same woman who had planned this perfect evening, the same woman I once shared late-night talks with, the same woman who used to curl up next to me while I played the piano, letting my music lull her to sleep. She descended the stairs, slower now. Her voice was softer, more uncertain. "We need to talk." I spoke quietly. "There's nothing left to say." She let out a quick breath, shivering slightly. She shook her head as if she couldn't believe I was truly leaving. "I was wrong about you," she admitted. I saw the faint tremor in her voice. I gave a dry laugh, glancing up at the city skyline, a never-ending expanse of steel and glass. Everything she had built. "Where did you think I'd be?" I finally asked, looking at her. She flinched. Because the truth had always been simple. She never truly loved me. She never truly believed in me. Maybe, once, she thought she did. But even then, love was conditional. She had always believed that one day I would wake up and decide to pursue the kind of success she valued. She swallowed hard. "You have no idea how many times I thought about calling you," she confessed. I moved closer. My tone was firm but calm. "You left me because I refused to change. Not because I lacked ambition." Her breath caught. "I did pursue ambition," I continued. "Just not the kind you respected." She had spent years telling herself that she had moved on, that her life was better without me. But now, on her wedding night, she stood in front of me, struggling to find the words to justify the choices she had made. I sighed. "Are you happy?" She opened her lips as if to answer, but no words came out. I smiled, realizing something. I didn't need her approval anymore, and that was the truth she had never been prepared for. She had spent all this time convincing herself that she had moved on, when, in reality, I was the one who had. She had lost something she could never get back, and she knew it. I gave her one last look before turning away for the final time. Inside, Richard would still be trying to salvage his dignity. Guests would still be whispering about what they had just witnessed. Claudia would return to the ballroom, smile for the cameras, and play her role as the perfect bride. But tonight, long after the guests had left and the music had faded, she would lie awake, knowing that she had built the perfect empire.